There is a trap that almost everyone falls into at some point. You've done it. I've done it. Pretty much everyone has done this. And that is when you need a quick answer and you're trying to make a point. So you use Google and you don't go very deep. And then you make a fool of yourself because you think you're being super clever, but really you've missed the entire point. We're going to look at an example of that today.
Vice Rhino here. Today I'm looking at a PragerU video, this one on the 10 Commandments. And do you know what? I've done a number of videos covering people talking about the 10 Commandments, and something I've noticed is that most of them are trying to argue that the 10 Commandments are necessary for a smoothly functioning modern society, but I don't think I've ever seen a video that actually lists what all 10 of the commandments actually are in their 10 Commandment videos. Maybe an image with the complete set flies by as they talk about prohibitions against murder and theft, but they never actually go into any detail.
Well, he's off to a great start because I have literally never seen a 10 Commandments video where they didn't discuss the 10 Commandments in detail. I would love to know what video he's referring to.
It's almost like they know that half of them are garbage, or that the different denominations list different commandments as the 10, so which 10 are the 10 can't even be agreed upon.
And this point is just irrelevant. If there's a house fire and two fire investigators can't agree on the source of the fire, they don't disagree that the fire exists.
Though, even considering that, I have yet to see any church even acknowledge the existence of the 10 Commandments that the Bible actually labels the 10 Commandments. Those are the ones from Exodus 34, which contain such important commandments as not boiling a baby goat in its mother's milk. I wonder if Dennis will actually read the commandments that he's using in this one. Let's go!
He's going to go into this point in detail in just a few minutes, so I'm going to wait until then to go into my full critique. But I will tell you right now, he has not read Exodus 34.
No document in world history so changed the world for the better, as did the 10 Commandments.
I would be inclined to argue that the Code of Hammurabi, on which the Hebrew laws were based, was more important than the 10 Commandments foundationally speaking, but there is certainly no denying that a key portion of the scripture of a religion that had a massive impact on the world is at least linked to that impact.
He makes a few comments like that throughout the video that don't really impact anything that he's saying. He just seems to like to hear himself talk. So I'm going to be cutting out those things. As always, I'll be linking the original video in the description. So if you want to see the fullness of what he says, you're welcome to jump down there.
Western civilization, the civilization that developed universal human rights, created women's equality, ended slavery, created parliamentary democracy, among other unique achievements, would not have developed without them.
I would argue that these things developed in spite of them. None of those things are mentioned in the 10 Commandments. Well, no, that's not entirely true. Slavery and women are both mentioned in the 10 Commandments. Does it say to treat women as equal or to not keep slaves? No, it actually tells you not to covet your neighbor's stuff, and lists his wife and slaves among the possessions of his that you're not allowed to covet. Slaves get a second mention in the part about not working on the Sabbath. Apparently God wants them to have a day off too. So the best thing that you can say about the 10 Commandments' position on slavery is that it's allowed, but give them one day off a week. There's nothing in there about universal human rights. Quite the opposite. Again, women are property and slaves are okay to keep. That's not universal human rights.
First and foremost, women are not discussed as property in the 10 Commandments. Not in the part that he quoted, and you're welcome to read the whole text. It's not there. Second, when people think of slavery, they think of American South antebellum slavery. That is not what the Bible's talking about. We like to conflate our words. We like to use one big brush stroke and cover everything. But unfortunately, real life and history especially is way more nuanced. Slavery in the Bible and in the ancient cultures that it comes from is much more like indentured servitude than the antebellum slavery. That said, it's not something people really want to discuss. It's something that's likely to get you canceled, fired, in major trouble in some form. And so no one really does talk about it. But I gotta say, indentured servitude is a lot better than the extreme debt system that we have in the world today. And probably have had since, at least since the Enlightenment. But that's not really the focus of this video, but it's worth mentioning.
It doesn't even mention governmental systems. How do you even get from any of the Ten Commandments to parliamentary democracy? Where does it say, thou shalt have a system of governance where the executive derives its democratic legitimacy from its ability to command the confidence of the legislature to which it is accountable? That actually would have been quite impressive for a culture to have come up with for the time, but no, it shows no signs of being aware of any future systems of government.
Fortunately, it really doesn't matter what impresses him. We don't need to try to impress him. But he's also missing the point. The point of the Ten Commandments is not to describe the function of government or how it's going to interact with society or anything like that. It is laying down the basic laws of which the Hebrew society would be built on. That is the foundation. And even if you don't believe it today, even if you don't like half of them or more than half of them, is irrelevant. The fact is that even the United States based its beginnings on these principles. No, most of the founding fathers were not Christian, but they were almost universally deists. And they had great respect for the Bible, with some notable exceptions. That said, you can't just toss it out and say, because they didn't mention democracy, which is a fairly piss-poor form of government to begin with, that it's somehow a subpar text. That is just nonsense.
As you will see when each of the Ten Commandments is explained, these commandments are as relevant today as when they were given over 3,000 years ago.
Oh, you're actually going to explain each of the Ten Commandments? That'll be a nice change. Most apologists just settle for mentioning the ones about murder and theft, with maybe the occasional reference to honoring parents and not coveting. It'll be nice to get to more than 40% of them for once.
This is the second time he said that, and he doesn't provide a single example. Now, if it was true that there was really just all these Ten Commandment videos and no one actually goes over the Ten Commandments, maybe he could do that. But the fact is, every single one I've ever seen goes over the Ten Commandments. That's the point of a Ten Commandments video.
In fact, they're so relevant that the Ten Commandments are all that is necessary to make a good world, a world free of tyranny and cruelty.
Oh, I very much beg to differ on that. Aside from the aforementioned approval of the practices of slavery and keeping women as property, there is no commandment against rape, nothing about equal rights for everyone without regards for things like race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, etc., nothing about child abuse, and I could go on. If those were the only rules in the world, then there are a lot of things there that are left up to the individual interpretation of those rules, and that never goes well. Hell, not even the Bible thinks that those 10 are the only 10 needed, otherwise it wouldn't have included the additional 603 commandments.
He makes a decent point here that these 10 are not all that's needed to have a perfectly wonderful functioning society. There's a lot more to it. These are, like I said, the foundation for the rest of the laws. Everything else is built on these 10, including the most important commandment, putting God above everything, loving God with your whole heart, soul, mind, strength. It's there in this foundation. That said, gender identity, we can throw that right out the window. Like, it's actually so wrong when people try to change their identity. Gay and lesbian activity, again, a sin. Why would he encourage that? No. Just the opposite.
Imagine for a moment a world in which there was no murder or theft. In such a world, there would be no need for armies or police or weapons.
Because murder and theft are the only two possible crimes, I guess. You do know that you can give someone quite a severe beating without it rising to the level of murder, right? Do the Ten Commandments say not to beat people up? No. Does it say not to sell drugs to kids? No.
First off, I agree again. Just because you don't have murder doesn't mean that you're going to have a perfect functioning society. It just won't work that way. If there's not a single murder done in the whole world, there are still other crimes to commit. So he's right there. But again, so much of this goes back to it's a foundational document. It's the foundation of the rest of the laws. And there's no legal document that I know of that is foundational that covers this kind of stuff. Kind of like the Constitution of the United States, it doesn't cover kidnapping or selling drugs to children, as he mentions. It doesn't even really cover, it doesn't cover murder or anything else. But it is the foundation of which all of our laws are supposed to be built on. Arguably, it's not really the case anymore. People just do what they want. The government does what it wants. But the foundation was never meant to cover all possibilities. It's just that, a foundation to build on.
And I don't know why you think that armies wouldn't be necessary. Do you really think that all international conflict would vanish if everybody adopted the Ten Commandments?
Well, yes, I do, actually.
You don't even seem to think that the commandment against killing is absolute, which is number 5 or 6, depending on which version we're going with.
Like I mentioned earlier, do not let that garbage distract you. That's all he's trying to do.
You advocate for the death penalty.
Keeping every murderer alive cheapens human life.
So clearly, thou shalt not kill has an implicit unless after it, in which you feel free to justify killing certain people depending on the circumstances.
It's literally a prohibition on murder. Every modern translation will use the word murder. The reason why the King James Version, which is what he's quoting, says kill, is because language has changed over time. When people in the 1600s would have read the King James Version of the Bible, they would have known it to be murder as we understand it today. And there's no controversy there. So no, he's completely wrong on this one.
And also, let's be real here. If we're just going to pretend that everyone is going to follow the rules perfectly, then pretty much any country's core law code will do better than the Ten Commandments. And whatever lies you're willing to tell about the US founding to attempt to claim that it was founded on Judeo-Christian values, that is not true of, say, Japan.
Well, it is, according to the founders themselves. John Adams famously said that the Constitution's for godly people and it's unfit for any other. So this guy is either completely lying. I'm going to go with completely lying. Like, I don't think he's this ignorant. He's lying. And the Constitution of Japan is actually based on the US. We helped them draft that after the Second World War. So he's wrong on 2 fronts. Let's see how else he can go wrong.
And yet, if everyone in the world were to suddenly just decide to obey all of Japan's laws, I'd wager that we'd end up with a much better world than if we scrapped all the laws and left it at just the Ten Commandments, with the same fantasy hypothetical where everybody obeys it.
Well, I guess you owe me, because you lost the wager. Seriously, I don't know where he gets that idea from. He's stating this, but he's not backing it up with even a basic logical argument. When I say that I think the Ten Commandments myself are fantastic, and what we need is a foundation for a good government, I absolutely put God front and center there. The first 3 commandments are essential to a good government. And all it takes is a quick look around the world today to see that that's true. The more secular the world gets, the worse things are getting. The more divided we are, the more atrocities occur across the globe. And here we are pretending, here he is pretending, that somehow religion's the bad guy. It's completely delusional.
Imagine further a world in which no one coveted what belonged to their neighbor.
So, communism? I thought you were against that, Dennis. You do realize that capitalism is based entirely on wanting things that other people have, right? I know in your propaganda you like to dress it up and pretend that everyone who has ever started a business did so purely out of the goodness of their hearts in order to look out for the welfare of others, and profits are simply a measurement of how well they have served their community. But again, that is a hypothetical fantasy world. That's not how reality works. In reality, capitalism works because people want more, and they will do what they can to get it.
He's right here. Capitalism absolutely enables the greedy. Communism absolutely enables the lazy. Socialism absolutely enables the cowardly, etc. None of these systems of government actually existed at the time of Jesus, at the time of the Old Testament, or really any time in the past, outside of the past 200-300 years. It really hasn't existed at all. So these new concepts cannot just be applied to the ancient world. And that's what both Dennis Prager and this guy get completely wrong.
A world in which children honored their mother and father and the family unit thrived.
I mean, if we're taking that one to mean that all families have to be made up of one woman, one man, and their kids, then that kind of sucks, to be honest. Sounds like a pretty repressive society so far, everything from homophobia to an endorsement of the practice of slavery. Now, I don't think I like this world of yours at all.
That is absolutely the best unit of society, the nuclear family. Single moms, single dads, and I should mention I am a single dad. That is not the ideal. It is not. And this homophobia nonsense is exactly that. It's nonsense. I've met a few people who've called themselves Christians who've acted angrily and hatefully towards homosexuals. But a simple conversation will show you that the vast majority of Christians are not hateful or negative towards homosexual people. But at the same time, we're not afraid to call it a sin, which is exactly what it is. No different than sins that I'm guilty of. All kinds of sins. And that's, okay is not the right word, but it's just reality. Just because you want to take pleasure in your sin doesn't mean that it's not a sin. And I can do the same thing where I could try to justify the things I do wrong. But it doesn't make that okay. So I don't know why I should grant homosexuality or anything else in this scenario. And again, nothing that he said here has anything to do with slavery. The nuclear family has nothing to do with slavery. Again, he's just reaching for straws to try to make his case. And if you look through the comments on this video, you'll see he's successful. His people blindly give him hoorays.
A world in which people obeyed the injunction not to lie.
Well, this one is a bit wobbly. You see, there are most definitely places in the Bible that tell you not to lie, and that is certainly one potential interpretation of this particular text, but it actually says bear false witness against. This would be really easy to interpret as allowing lying, but not in a legal situation. In other words, don't lie to protect your friend who broke the law, or to falsely accuse someone of breaking the law when they didn't. And really, that's actually the preferable interpretation. Flattery's out the window, nothing but brutal honesty from now on, or you go to prison. Flattery has been called the lubricant of social intercourse, but nope. From now on, when someone asks if that dress makes them look fat, if it does, the answer has to be yes, or you go to jail.
So I agree that it's not prohibiting all lying here. Of course, when I explain the Ten Commandments to my kids, I do put the context of lying here. I tell them the Bible says not to lie. We read that, and I'll tell them it means not to lie, because it's an easy way for them to understand. They certainly don't understand the legal context of anything like that. That said, he's taking this scenario to a ridiculous level that he knows he doesn't need to do. If your wife says, does this dress make me look fat, and you're obligated to say yes, that's not even what's inferred in this verse. There's no way you can get that out of this. It literally says bear false witness against your neighbor, so against someone else. It's lying about someone else. And yes, if it's in a legal context, which again, this is the foundation for a nation's laws, you can't lie in court. I will absolutely agree with that. So this is just more examples of him playing word games.
The recipe for a good world is all there in these 10 sublime commandments.
If these commandments are so sublime, and they are really all we need for a utopian society, then why do you skip the ones that, well, for lack of a better way to say this, obviously have nothing to do with building a utopian society? You know, like the no graven images one, which could easily be interpreted as outlawing cameras, and by extension all PragerU videos?
Even with the full context of the verse right in front of him, he still doesn't get the context. If you read the next verse, it's clearly talking about worshiping them.
Or the no other gods before me one, which kind of flies in the face of that whole Judeo-Christian thing, does it not? Last I checked, Jews don't consider Jesus to be Yahweh, so being a Christian means putting another god before the Jewish God.
A complete lack of understanding of the Trinity, and most likely no attempt was made to understand the Trinity or the relationship of Christianity to Judaism. Even a quick Google search would have actually showed him the basics of this. But here he couldn't even be bothered to do that much.
And how about not taking God's name in vain? Is that necessary for a utopian society? No, absolutely not. We can have a good world without putting restrictions on saying God damn. But really, that's not even what this means, despite Christians taking it that way. It's even more obscure than that. It's more about God's actual name, Jehovah or Yahweh. If you are going to say the name, you'd better act in accordance with his code of conduct, basically. Or, alternately, this protects the whole swear to God thing, making it super duper against the rules to promise something while invoking God's name, and then to not follow through with that promise. But at the end of the day, no matter how it's interpreted, it has nothing to do with how society should be run.
Completely wrong here. Any society that strives so much to honor God will be a fantastic society.
How about remembering the Sabbath and keeping it holy? It could be argued that this is to make sure that everyone gets a day off, but using stuff like science, we've learned that giving workers adequate time off and shorter workdays actually improves productivity, so it seems like a 5-day work week with a 6-hour work day is the sweet spot for improving efficiency and mental health. So God's layout will result in overworked, tired, inefficient workers.
This guy is so atheist that God guarantees everyone a day off every week, slave or not, and he complains about it. That's over the top ridiculous.
And interestingly, you also chose to leave out the adultery one, which I would agree doesn't belong in a legal code, as it is a purely personal matter, but usually apologists are happy to trot that one out as if it's an obviously moral thing to legislate, when in reality the legislation of adultery is entirely unjustified meddling in personal affairs. Pun intended, obviously.
Over and over again, atheists try to define morality as not harming other people. But then when it comes to sex, they're so obsessed with it that any kind of regulating on sexual activity, even if it prevents the harm of someone else, they're against that regulation. It is completely a double standard that they have. No, adultery, perfectly fine being legislated. It harms another person. You've entered a marriage contract, something deeper than a contract. If you break it, you should be held responsible for that.
God spoke all these words.
Funny thing about that, after Moses came down the mountain and smashed the tablets because he was mad that the Israelites had broken the rules that they didn't know they had yet.
False. Again, he's never touched the book of Exodus. They were well aware of what they were doing, and what they were doing was wrong. The same thing is that you don't need it written in the law codes to not murder someone. You know murder is wrong. You don't need it written in the law codes not to rape someone. We know rape is wrong. That's the same thing here. It is codified here as being part of the foundation of the Israelite society. But they were well aware that they were not to go after other gods, which is the crime they had committed.
God rewrote the commandments on new tablets. He didn't speak at this time, he wrote it himself with his own finger? Does God have fingers?
Do fish have fingers?
Anyway, my point is, it explicitly states that he is writing the same words that were on the first tablet. So let's quickly go through the other 10 Commandments, which also happens to be the only set of 10 Commandments that the Bible actually calls the 10 Commandments. And these are the ones that were written on the tablets by God himself, and these tablets went into the Ark of the Covenant. So obviously they are the most important ones, right?
Notice he jumps from verse 1 to verse 27. Which at that point could actually even be divided into another chapter. They were not originally written with chapter and verses. That was added during the medieval period for the scholars to keep better track of where they were. If you actually read those 26 verses going before that, you'll see those 10 commandments that God carves with his finger have nothing to do with what he's about to talk about. They're completely unrelated. God writes those 10 commandments down, and then he says, as part of his covenant, this is another set of laws for them, the covenant people, not all people, these people, to observe and obey. And we don't have enough time, and it's beyond the scope of this video, to go into what it means to be a covenant people. But just know, those laws, specific people, specific time, he says there in that chapter. And he's going to choose to ignore that context completely.
Anyway, number 1. Do not make a covenant with the people that live in the land you're going to. In fact, tear down all their altars and 2. Don't worship other gods. 3. Don't marry people from different tribes. 4. Don't make gods out of cast metal. 5. Keep the feast of unleavened bread. 6. All that open the womb are gods. He gets all the firstborn, including human babies, which could be interpreted as human sacrifice.
No, again, context. Again, if you picked up the book of Exodus at all and read it, you would see over and over again how evil God considered human sacrifice. So no, it could not be interpreted as human sacrifice unless you did your quick Google search and found this verse.
7. Rest on the Sabbath. 8. Observe the Feast of Weeks. 9. 3 times a year your menfolk will have to go appear before God. 10. Don't offer the blood of God's sacrifice with anything leavened, because God fucking hates yeast for some reason.
Again, context, context, context. What they never ever seem to ask, but always point out, is verses like this where don't mix leaven into your bread, or don't mix fibers in clothing. But they never ask, why does God expect that? Is he just being super restrictive and petty for some bizarre reason? Or is there an actual reason for this? They never ask that question. And there is a reason. It's separation. The idea of separation was completely central to the Israelite identity as God's people. They had to be separate from the world. And this is not, as people try to twist it into, an ethnic thing. This is a belief thing. God didn't care what people's skin color was or what language they spoke. Moses married a woman with much darker skin than he had. This was not an issue for him whatsoever. What is an issue is if a woman from another tribe or from another people pulled you away from the true God to follow their false gods. That was the issue. That's what it's all about. And that's what these things represent.
11. Leftovers from the Passover are bad. Don't keep them. 12. The best of the first fruits of your ground go to God. 13. And finally, the infamous don't boil a goat in its mother's milk. Now, you might have noticed that their list of 10 commandments is longer than 10 commandments. It's not very clear, it could be broken up in different ways, but it definitely says in the text that these are the 10 commandments.
Definitely doesn't. Just read the chapter.
You see, if the 10 Commandments, as great as they are, were given by any human authority, then any person could say, who is this man Moses? Who is this king or queen? Who is this government to tell me how I should behave?
And we can say the same thing of God. Who is this God to tell me how to behave? Why is his opinion more important than mine when it comes to morality?
Great question. I'm going to assume he's actually looking for an answer. God is the creator of heaven and earth. He's the creator of the whole universe. When we look out at the stars and we see billions and billions of stars, and we see black holes, well, we don't see black holes, but you know what I mean. We see planets, we see nebulas, we see these amazing things out in space. And then we look at our own planet, just our planet. We see diversity of life. We look at atoms, and we go smaller than atoms. We see subatomic particles, smaller than electrons. And we can see these things, and they're perfect, and they're wonderful. And God designed all that. Then, despite man's sinfulness, despite the fact that we try to reject him and we do wrong every day, and then we try to justify our wrong, He still came down and died for us. He didn't wait for us to be sorry before he did this. He did it ahead of time, so that no matter when we come to him, the payment's already been made. We sinned, and we deserve the punishment of that, and he took it on himself. Yes, his morality far outweighs yours, no matter what you think of the matter.
Okay, so why is God indispensable to the Ten Commandments? Because, to put it as directly as possible, if it isn't God who declares murder wrong, murder isn't wrong.
Why? Like, really, why? Why is murder okay if God isn't the one saying it's wrong? Why does God saying it's wrong automatically make it wrong? Why do God's morals take precedence over human morals? Generally, apologists tend to answer this one with something along the lines of saying that morality is objective, and God is the source of that objective standard for morality, which doesn't actually follow. That would just be subjective morality, with God imposing his personal subjective morality on us.
So what? The greatest conceivable being is going to give us the greatest morality. And no human authority, government or otherwise, overrules that. People can say something is right or wrong, but you look across history and we see that not all people agree. If you take the Nazis, for example, if they had won World War II and they killed everyone who disagreed with them, would they be right? No, they wouldn't. And by your morality, by your subjective morality, without God, you can't say they were wrong. But appealing to God's authority, appealing to the one who's above everything, you can absolutely say it's wrong. It's the only way you can say it's wrong. Anything else is just your opinion.
Or, morality comes from a careful evaluation of desired outcomes, and so we can figure out which actions are moral or immoral based on how well they do with getting us closer to or farther away from those desired outcomes. So, if, for instance, maximizing well-being and minimizing harm is the desired outcome, then murder is wrong.
Even if every society agrees that that is a good definition of morality, every society is going to have a vastly different idea of what that looks like and how that should be accomplished.
My question for you, though, Death Row Dennis, is how is it that murder is wrong, but murdering the murderer is not wrong?
No definition is that murder. It's killing someone who deserves to be killed. Murder is killing someone who does not deserve to be killed.
People today as incomprehensible, even absurd.
I wouldn't necessarily say it's incomprehensible or absurd, more like arbitrary. Why does morality not come from a king? Because God is more powerful than a king. So why does morality come from God? Because he's the most powerful. Might makes right.
All you have is might makes right. Whoever has the government makes the rules. That's his standard. But when you apply the same thing to God, suddenly that's not okay anymore. They want to pretend like they aren't on the same level as Nazis, but they absolutely are. Their same morality applies. Just because they're not murdering large groups of people doesn't mean that they don't have the same foundation of morality. They just go with their God-given instinct to not kill people, which is, of course, a good thing. But let's take the current discussion of a certain something being mandated to everyone. Let's hope that doesn't get this video taken down. But in that example, the government determines that it's the right thing to do. And there's nothing we can do about it because we don't have the might to say no. So regardless of how you feel of vaccines, I said the dirty word, then it doesn't matter because the government's going to tell you what the morally correct thing to do is. And you can apply the same thing to God. Yes, God outranks the government. But I would go beyond that. I would say that God made us. Because we are made in God's image, we have his morality ingrained in us, but we resist that morality. And some people, because of the effects of sin, because of the effects of the fall and the curse, they don't tick right mentally. They don't acknowledge empathy. They don't have empathy. They can't function normally. They don't realize that things that they do are wrong. But that's the exception, not the rule. The rule is, we know that murder is wrong. We know that rape is wrong. We know these things are wrong because God made us in his image. And it is our wrongdoing that changes that. Now, even if you disagree with what I'm saying, even if you say, I'm an atheist, so I don't believe that, that's not my point. My point is, we do have a better explanation for morality than atheists do. We have a better foundation for what we believe than atheists do. And we can make better claims to our morality than atheists can. That's my point. I don't care if you believe it or not, but what I'm saying is the foundation is better with theism.
God doesn't seem to be keen on clarifying this for us, so who does the clarifying, Dennis? Historically, it's been the people who run the church and the people who run the government. So, kings and popes and all the other people that you said we don't get our morals from. Your system literally leads us to looking to these very human and fallible authorities as the source for our morality, based on their interpretation of God's word. My system of having a moral goal and assessing the morality of an action based on its actual outcome allows for the questioning of these supposed authorities in order to arrive at an actual moral conclusion.
First, God did give us the church to do just that, to lead us, to interpret things for us, to help us and guide us. 2, your system, again, comes with the problem that two people can look at the results of an action and come to completely different ideas of what that action implies or what it means or what should be done afterwards. So your system's not that great. It's, again, completely subjective, and whoever's going to be the stronger of the two of you is going to win the argument.
Many of you are thinking, is this guy saying you can't be a good person if you don't believe in God?
Oh, I'm sorry, I guess I had the wrong objection there. Go ahead, have at the straw man.
Let me respond as clearly as possible. I am not saying that. Of course, there are good people who don't believe in God, just as there are bad people who do.
Almost like God really isn't the source of morality or something.
No, if you're made in God's image and he ingrained his likeness in you, then you will know morality that way.
You somehow have to come up with excuses as to why it was okay in that instance, and that's what apologists always do with problematic Bible passages like this. They say things like, but the Canaanites were practicing child sacrifice, in an attempt to justify the immoral act of genocide. They try to present the situation in a way that would have the outcomes be worse than the heinous actions that God commanded or committed, because they know that our morality comes from a combination of empathy and the measurement of outcomes, a harm versus well-being analysis. When you make excuses for why God's actions in the Bible are moral, you are borrowing from secular morality to make those determinations.
You know, it's kind of cute how he tries to take a common Christian argument that atheists have to borrow from the Christian worldview and tries to flip it on its head, but it doesn't work. For one thing, God has authority over all life on the planet, so it literally doesn't matter what God does with the human life on earth. You may not like it, but if God is who he says he is, then he absolutely has that authority. He has far more authority over human life than the government, and the government takes your life into its hands every single day. That's reality. Beyond that, if you, again, understand context and ancient cultures, you will know that the supposed genocide accounts actually fit with common language, terminology, and culture of the time period. Dr. I'm trying to think of his name. K. Kitchen, I think was his name, or is his name, wrote a lengthy book on the ancient Near East and tying it in with the Bible. It's a fantastic work, and he covers this exact thing. And he actually has works from the Egyptians and the Hittites and other groups surrounding Israel that use the exact same language about the other nations around them, about various tribes, about the Israelites themselves. But we know that the Israelites were not completely exterminated or wiped out. It was simply the conquest narratives of that day. Now, you don't have to believe me. Don't take my word for it. Don't even take Dr. Kitchen's word for it. Look it up for yourself. You can do that, especially if you are a student and have access to your university's library. I encourage you to look up whatever you can. It's not too difficult to find, but that's my source is Dr. Kitchen's work.
In the 20th century, millions of people in communist societies and under Nazism killed about 100 million people, and that doesn't count a single soldier killed in war.
And do you really think the death toll would have been any lower had the people who were behind the Christian Crusades had access to the same technology and sheer numbers of people as the communist and fascist regimes?
I don't really like saying this kind of thing, but this guy is an idiot. He's a complete idiot. He doesn't know history at all. He wants to babble about the Crusades being like the Holocaust. This guy is truly, truly a product of a stupid society, which we are living in.
They killed as many Muslims as they could, and the Muslims killed as many of them as they could. Seems like power-hungry leaders are intent on killing people that don't belong to the same in-group as them, religion or no.
This is a guy who just listens to way more Hollywood than he listens to history.
Those are perfect examples of why morality from authority is the most dangerous kind of morality that there is.
Morality from authority is the only morality an atheist has.
You seem to be getting your morality from a particular interpretation of a book that you claim to be the Word of God, but that book can and has been interpreted in many different ways, many of which are obviously immoral. And who is in charge of deciding which interpretations are the correct interpretations?
The fact that people can and have interpreted the Bible in different ways is completely irrelevant as to whether or not it's the truth.
If we're talking laws, there are really only 2 that belong on the books, maybe 3.
So this video is not about whether or not God exists. He's presupposing that God does not exist. I presuppose that he does exist for the purposes of this video. That said, if God does exist, then all 10 commandments do matter. Putting God first, honoring him, not making false idols, and not worshiping other gods are all extremely, extremely relevant to a good, moral, functioning society. Putting God first will always be better than ignoring God, because he is the ultimate good. He's the supreme being.
In 3,000 years, no one has ever come up with a better system than the God-based 10 Commandments for making a better world, and no one ever will.
Well, that's a nice subjective opinion you've got there, Dennis, but you're wrong.
Well, in the last 10 minutes or so, things started getting really repetitive, and I didn't want to repeat myself over and over again, so I trimmed a lot. But I do encourage you to go watch his video, not just to see that I didn't hide his arguments or try to make him sound bad, but also just to give his channel another view, because even though he's an atheist, he put a lot of work in his video, and he gave me something to respond to, so I encourage you to go and check that out. That said, he finishes up by disagreeing with someone's opinion, and that's really all what this video came down to. I disagree with Dennis Prager a lot, actually, even though he is a conservative and a theist. But I also disagreed with pretty much everything Vice Rhino said. I did agree with a couple things that he said, but those seemed to be mostly straw man things that he had set up to begin with, not things that Dennis Prager said or that I've heard other apologists say. I guess this is also the one video that I've come across in the 10 Commandments where he doesn't cover all 10 Commandments. So I guess I'm eating a little bit of crow on that because he does only cover 4 of the commandments. But I guess I run in different video circles or something, I guess, because, like I said, every video I've ever seen on the 10 Commandments has covered all 10 Commandments. Whether it's the Eastern Orthodox, the Catholic or Protestant, or the Ethiopian versions of it, they've all been covered pretty thoroughly. Now, just to make a quick note on that as well, we all agree what's written there. We just divide them up a little bit differently. And that's not really a problem as far as discussing this with atheists goes. It's only kind of an internal problem where we discuss why we divide things up the way we do. For example, Protestants like to divide up the first and second commandments in a way where it sounds like making any graven images wrong. So therefore Catholics and Eastern Orthodox are wrong for having icons or statues of Jesus and Mary. Despite the fact that, as Vice Rhino points out, it is not just a prohibition on images of angels, saints, that sort of thing, but any graven image. He goes so far as to suggest camera images. But again, context. When you look at the context, you know it's for worship. It says it right there in the verse. So go check it out yourself. I always encourage you to do that. If you liked the video, give us a thumbs up. If you didn't, feel free to give us a thumbs down. Just let me know why in the comments, and I will try to do better next time. If it's just because you disagree with me, well, we'll probably just keep on disagreeing. But hopefully we see you next time. And remember, go to Mass. And remember, go to Mass.